The following presentation is part of the Agronomy and Horticulture Seminar Series at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Agronomy and Horticulture Seminar Series. It is my great honor today to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Andrea Basche. Andrea is an assistant professor in the Department of Agronomy and Horticulture. She received her bachelor degree in biological science and philosophy from Fordham University, her master in applied climate science from Columbia University. She received a PhD in crop production and physiology and sustainable agriculture from Iowa State University. Andrea teaches several undergraduate courses here in the department, include resource efficient crop management strategies, and other courses. Her research focus is on cropping system sustainability. So without further ado, I'll turn this to Andrea.
Great. Well, thank you, Lucci, for the introduction and the committee for the opportunity to kick off the spring semester seminar series. And this is really a great chance for me to introduce or reintroduce myself to some of you and share what my team has been working on since I started in my role just over 4 years ago. And so I'm going to talk mostly today about our research, but I also want to share some learnings from students in my classes. And I hope to illustrate in the presentation how our work is adding to a growing body of knowledge around the benefits of crop diversity and diversity more broadly. And you'll see I deliberately titled my presentation Collaborative, because none of this work that I'm sharing has been done alone. It's been done with many others. And that's really a kind of core practice or value of mine. I feel like most of the work I've done in my career has been in teams. And so I wanted to, share that explicitly as I see it as really an important part of our path forward to solving challenges. And I want to get started with just a quick restatement of some of the goals that we are working toward as an institution and a scientific community, and then situate our work within it. And so the goal that I'm showing you here is from the Institute of Ag and Natural Resources Strategic Plan. And I've underlined some of the key points that we have a goal of supporting a bio-based economy with sustainable food, fiber, and natural resources. I also want to note that embedded within IANR, we also recognize the value of diversity at the bottom of this pyramid. Diversity, I'm mostly talking about crop diversity, but also in terms of people and ideas and who feels they belong within our community. And so I really appreciate in this diagram that maximizing impact is at the top of the pyramid, recognizing kind of everything below it being critical to achieving this impact. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit later. And then within our scientific societies, here I'm showing you one community within the American Society of Agronomy, as I believe this is a broad goal that many of us within the department and institute are working toward. Of course, the goal of balancing crop yields and negative environmental impacts from agriculture have underlined a few key things here too. Balancing all of these metrics, particularly the socioeconomic components, really is a challenge, right? And so with that said, on the goals, what are some of the challenges that we're dealing with and that our work is trying to address? And so we all know right now that the pandemic and supply chain issues have led to real shortages of herbicides, an inability for producers to procure their preferred crop inputs. And even though commodity prices have increased significantly as of late, so have fertilizer costs. And so for some products, they're more than double or even triple than what they were in recent years. And we know that every year and every season seems to bring new weather extremes. So 2019 was one of the wettest years in the US, including in Nebraska. I'm sure that flooding is still very present in many of our memories. Since then, we've really had drier and hotter months and hotter conditions. And the state right now, much of it is in drought or abnormally dry conditions and really has been so for about a year or more. And then something else that is always heavy on my mind is this trend of consolidation, particularly as someone who works closely with our undergraduates, and many of you do as well. Many of our undergraduates intend to farm in the future. And I'm always thinking about how these trends, they don't need to be destiny for our young people who want to farm. And just a brief story here, I'm really fortunate to now be serving as a co-author on the 5th National Climate Assessment for the chapter that will focus on our region, the Northern Great Plains. And in a recent session that we had with stakeholders, someone raised a really articulate point about how he is hearing from many people. He works particularly with tribal communities. This trend, it goes across rural, urban populations in our region, that for many communities, it's really a struggle to keep people in place with economic trends, with climate. And I think that how we can help people stay in place and have a good livelihood is really what I think our mission, my own mission, mission of the Land-Grant University is really about, that idea of keeping people with a good livelihood in place. And now back to cropping systems. So when I talk about cropping systems in class, I sometimes share a schematic that looks like this. It's a reminder of all the things that are involved in a cropping system, right? It's not just the crops that we grow in terms of timing, orientation, et cetera. It's the external inputs, as well as the natural resources like sunlight, rain, soil. It's also the outputs that we glean, which are not just yield, but also profit and environmental outcomes. And it's also the people, like you see in the middle, who are working on or studying the land. And what I want to illustrate and what we're finding in our work so far is that when we try to utilize more of those natural resources, namely sunlight for longer periods of the year, and our soil to reduce the loss of soil or improve its function. And when we do those things through a diversification approach, that we can conserve resources and improve profitability. And so what I want to show you here is how I feel our work is contributing to this important body of knowledge. And what I'm going to share with you in particular today is our work related to cover crops grown in corn soybean rotation, sometimes with other crops, as well as some of our initial work with Kernza, which is a perennial grain crop. And so again, these approaches, thinking about natural resource utilization, extending the growing window, and covering the soil. So I want to move next into our research and sharing some of the things that we have learned about diversified management and its ability to meet some of those challenges that I just shared with you. And I want to start with a truly collaborative project that is supported by the NRCS and includes the work of 2 of our graduate students. The first is the work that I'm going to share from Fernanda Krupek, who you see in the photos here on the left. On the right, you see Fernanda again, as well as Sal Ramirez, who's a postdoc working on our team, as well as Tawana Almeida. I'm going to share some of her work later. She's a graduate student with us. And then Alex Urban, who's from the NRCS. And I just want to share, they were such a huge help to us last spring and summer with field sampling and in so many other ways. I'm sure you all know and experience with COVID and those challenges of getting support. We were just so grateful to have their support and good spirit in the field and in many other ways. And so this project is one that started actually in 2016 and 2017, even prior to my arrival here. It involves a number of on-farm research experiments across the state. And the way it worked was that farmers got to decide what kind of soil health management system they wanted to study on their farms. And that means that these experiments include a number of different things. Pretty much all of them include cover crops in some fashion. Some include cover crops and livestock grazing. Some include cover crops in different crop rotations. And so that's the context for what I'm going to share about some of the things that Fernanda and our other graduate student, Elizabeth Oyce, have found. And I also want to show more of the team behind our project. So this is, again, a great collaborative endeavor with research, students, postdocs, Darren Redfern in our department, extension educators like Laura Thompson and Nathan Mueller, and state soil health specialist Aaron Hurd there in the middle from NRCS, as well as his colleagues around the state. And now, one of Fernanda's many projects that we recently had published in the journal Geoderma was a synthesis of soil test results from 10 on-farm experiments. And so the tricky thing that she did so well in this project was to create different metrics for some of those various experiments and soil health management systems that were included on the farms, so that we could compare across different experiments. And so one of those indices was cover crop use. So that's what you see here. So we basically grouped and standardized the studies based on the length of time that they were using cover crops. And so the bigger circles and the darker colors that you see here are farms that have been using cover crops for a longer period of time. And so in this paper, she analyzed improvements from soil health management systems on various soil properties, including those that are a part of the Haney soil health test. And one of the things that that test tries to do is to incorporate more of the microbially available carbon and nitrogen pools beyond what you would get from a traditional chemical soil test. And so the figure on the left is showing the relationship between predicted nitrogen release and then soil biological activity, CO2 at the bottom. And so the figure on the right shows the nitrogen potential savings, and these are grouped again by the length of time that the farms used cover crops. And what Fernanda found is really promising. It's that those farms that grew cover crops for longer periods of time actually had greater soil biological test activity, as you can see on the left. And although we would expect to see that kind of relationship between the biological activity, the soil test biological activity and the predicted nitrogen release, the trend is clear that the longer use of cover crops led to the greater potential for nitrogen release, and as a result, the greater potential for nitrogen savings for a subsequent wheat or corn crop. And so we know that soil health tests like this are a snapshot in time. They're a way to monitor changes. But what this does, we believe, is it underscores this point that there's potential nutrient and economic savings from that improved biological activity related to this diversified management with cover crops. Okay, so the next student with data from this project that I want to share is Elizabeth Oys. And so she is planning to present her master's projects in her defense later this spring. And she has been focused on 4 of those farms, 4 of the farms and 2 experiment stations that have had cover crops in use for several years to see how the cover crops are impacting weed communities. And she's done something that is really interesting, but really time consuming. So last spring, she collected soil from those farms and then watered that soil in the greenhouse to see what weed communities emerge from the seed bank. And then she also went back during the growing season to see what weeds emerged. And so for 7 months of last year, she counted and categorized all the weeds that emerged. And it's really interesting because it can tell us more than just what is above ground, which is often what is measured. And so again, she focused on 4 of those farms that had a particular design with a cover crop and a no cover crop control, again, as well as data from 2 experiments that had cover crops in use for several years at South Central Ag Lab and at NREC in Eastern Nebraska. And so I'm showing you just data from one of those on-farm sites here. The left is the seed bank and the right is the above ground weeds that emerge. And we are excited by her work because we do think it's honing our understanding or filling in the blanks really around the role that cover crops can play with weeds. And what we found is that it's not really simple. It's not always as simple as a relationship as just like more cover crop biomass leads to less weeds. But what we're seeing is some different trends in what is in the seed bank and what weeds actually emerge during the growing season. And so on the left, you're looking at the difference again, just from one of the on-farm sites. This is a site in Greeley County, where she actually counted a significant increase in pigweed seeds from the seed bank in the cover crop treatment. That's on the left. But on the right, when she went back during the growing season to measure the weeds that emerged, both before and after post-emergence herbicide application, that the cover crop had significantly reduced the total weeds that emerged. And although this is just one of 6 sites, the work does show us that cover crops have potential to reduce the density of weeds that emerge, even if there are weeds that are present in the seed bank. And she also has some evidence that the cover crops could be increasing weed diversity, which is really interesting. It's something that research notes is an indicator of ecosystem function, and it could suggest that there is a less competitive weed community overall. In other work I recently published with colleagues from Iowa State University, we described some of the other potential ways that cover crops could be shifting weed communities, delaying their emergence, increasing weed seed predation. Again, it's not always just as simple as more biomass of cover crops leads to more suppression of weeds. There's many other things that could be happening. And we think that this work is exciting to help fill in some of those blanks for us. Okay, so the next project that I want to focus a little more time on, because we have some really exciting results that we found so far. And so I'm going to share some work that we are doing with the Precision Sustainable Agriculture Project that's being led by PhD student Tawana Almeida, you see here in the photos. So this is a project that is a Sustainable Ag Systems Award from USDA NIFA. And our involvement includes supporting 2 experiments at NREC and 3 on-farm trials for 3 years. It's also supporting my own and Sam Wortman's involvement in the creation of a brand new cover crop course. It's been very exciting. We launched it last fall. We had 50 students across 2 sections, online and resident. I'm really not even going to say more about that. I probably could have a whole seminar about how we developed that course and executed it across 6 other institutions. But for now, I just want to share some results from one of the experiments at NREC in our first year, 2021, or 2020 and 2021. And let me tell you a little bit more about the experiment. In some ways, it's a very classic agronomy experiment that we are looking at corn with 6 different nitrogen rates and 3 cover crop treatments, as well as a cover crop control, no cover crop control, as I'm showing you here in the slide. And so we are planting cover crops in the late summer following oats. So this would represent not just a corn soybean rotation, but that is because the goal of the experiment is to understand if and how cover crops can change optimal nitrogen rates. And I'm really proud to say that in our first year, we grew perhaps the most perfect cover crop I've grown to this point in my career. And in particular, the mix and the cereal rye produced significant biomass. It's what you see in the photo here right before termination last April. So we had very full stands, really excellent fall growth, and we terminated at perhaps the exact right time before the rye really started to get taller, such that it would have increased its carbon content. So you can see here the carbon to nitrogen ratios of the decomposing biomass over the growing season, and the rye and the mixture never reached a carbon to nitrogen ratio that's known to initiate a mobilization. That's a really encouraging result. And I do want to note in the photo here, research technician Tom Galusha, who supports most all of our field experiments. None of this would be possible without his experience and guidance. And so to get those carbon and nitrogen ratios that I just showed you over the growing season, we filled litter bags at cover crop termination and then left them in the field to decompose and then removed them to measure the carbon and nitrogen content over the growing season, as you can see in this illustration. And then what I'm showing you here is the nitrogen that was released cumulatively over the season. And this is weeks after cover crop termination. So you can see the cumulative release for the 3 treatments was between 70 and 80 kilograms per hectare, which is really significant, you know, and what a cover crop can do when we give it more sunlight and time to grow. So there are several interesting things that I want to draw your attention to here. The first is that what I'm showing you are the corn yields in the 160 pounds of nitrogen treatment. The first is that even with that really large amount of rye and mix cover crop, we didn't see any negative yield impact on corn relative to the control. So that's the treatments from left to right in the graph 1, 2, and 4. We did see that corn following hairy vetch was significantly higher than the control. And then, actually, let me make sure that table doesn't go away. The table that I'm showing you here is actually showing how the vetch treatment compares to the control at other nitrogen rates, right? So we're trying to determine in this experiment if the cover crop is has the potential to change or potentially reduce nitrogen rates. So essentially, we did not see statistical differences in corn yield following hairy vetch with 80 pounds of nitrogen relative to the control grown at 160 pounds of nitrogen. So that's the top 2 rows in that table. And then if you go up one nitrogen rate, we did not see any statistical difference in corn yield with the vetch at 160 pounds of nitrogen compared to the control at 240 pounds of N. So let me just show you some like back of the envelope calculations related to this for what those results might mean for input costs. So again, these top two bullets are what I just told you about the yields that hairy vetch did in some nitrogen rates increase yields relative to the control. And if we look at the N rates a little differently, we don't see differences when you subtract 80 pounds in the hairy vetch treatment. But if we compare the cost we paid for the vetch seed, I know it's not minimal, $1.90 a pound times the seeding rate, you get an amount that is nearly the same or even a little bit of a savings compared to how much 80 pounds of nitrogen would cost at current fertilizer costs. And if we think about that significant amount of biomass in the rye and mixed treatments, we did have excellent weed suppression. In this case, I'm not showing you that data. It was to a growth level that prior research and our experience was that it could have allowed us to potentially reduce the amount of herbicides that we use and suppress a high amount of weeds. And so the rye seed costs were about $15 an acre, which definitely comparable to herbicide costs depending on the program. And so we think that this is really promising results from year one to show what a cover crop can do again for potential fertilizer or herbicide costs when we, again, give the plant more sunlight to photosynthesize. And now we fully realize that these are not simple changes that we're talking about for many producers, that we're talking about maybe including more crops in the rotation and really shifting herbicide or fertilizer programs. So we know that this is a challenge. If it was easy, right, everybody would already be doing it. But we are using some of the knowledge that we're gaining from our research to try to support an understanding of what is possible for cover crop biomass and then relate it to some of these potential savings. And I do want to make a very brief mention of a project funded by the Nebraska Environmental Trust that Katia Kohler-Cole and I have been co-leading. And this is to develop a predictive tool for the state where you can select your location, soil type, planting and termination dates for cover crops and get estimates of biomass as well as probabilities for those different estimates of cover crop biomass. And we will have this launched later this year on the CropWatch platform, along with more specific cover crop information to Nebraska. And we share this and we hope to make it a call to those of you who are working in this realm to have the opportunity to integrate your work into our platform. And I just want to note too that the basis of this tool is work that our former postdoc Nilovna Chatterjee led that we published in 2020. We set up the ABSA model to predict cover crop biomass with experiments that had been established by Chris Proctor, Roger Elmore, and Angela Bastidas, who's a former PhD student here. So again, collaborative effort there to even get this off the ground, and even more so that we've done this work alongside colleagues at the Holland Computing Center. They've been working with us, as well as a panel of producers, just real cover crop innovators in the state to help us keep the platform kind of grounded in function and answering questions that will be helpful to their audience. Okay, so that's what I want to say about cover crops. And I want to pivot briefly to share some of our work with Kernza. So the work that I'm going to share and make mention of here is a part of another large project funded by USDA NIFA that's being led by the University of Minnesota. And Alberta Abasquini is working on this project for her master's work, as well as Tom Galusha, who again has been so willing to experiment with me in this new crop. So Kernza is the grass that you see in the photo on the left. It is a perennial grain crop. Intermediate wheatgrass, if you're familiar with the Eurasian forage grass. Scientists at the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas have been selecting for agronomic traits over the last few decades of intermediate wheatgrass. And this effort that we're a part of now is, I would have to guess, the largest public investment to date on Kernza. And the team includes supply chain experts, extension, education. Our main contribution is going to be to support two field experiments that we planted this past fall, involving intercropping some new varieties, as well as a fertility trial to try to hone nutrient recommendations. And I just want to briefly share some highlights. This is from what Roberta presented at the agronomy meetings last fall. Tom and I started a small Kernza variety trial. We planted that in 2018 on East Campus. Some of you maybe had the opportunity to see it. And we're now working, so we harvested 3 years of data. We're working on publishing that with some of our collaborators at the Land Institute and others. And what we saw was really strong comparable performance across varieties in Nebraska, including in the first year, we had one of the highest performing varieties at any of the sites. And then in 2019, we planted an experiment that we've been managing organically with Kernza intercropped with several different legumes, including alfalfa. And we again saw great performance there, even higher yields than in some of the variety trial yields. And so I guess the point of this is to say it's been our kind of preliminary work, but we've learned how to plant and harvest the crop. Is that there is a lot of potential for Kernza in Nebraska, again, in terms of its performance relative to how it's done elsewhere. I think it has particular use for operations that have livestock. Research shows that it can perform even better when it's grazed or cut for hay in fall and spring. And, I do want to say, sharing, we're studying cautiously and optimistically, that I'm not naive enough, or nor are my collaborators on these projects, to think that this is a crop that's ready for millions of acres next year, but we're really, cautiously and optimistically studying it for its potential. And relatedly, I do want to share, with my Kernza collaborators, the meetings, the team, every time we get together, I just leave really feeling hopeful and inspired. And this is a snapshot on the left of a poem that was read at a virtual meeting from a Kernza farmer in Minnesota about igniting civic imagination. And, a reminder that although we know that having a perennial agriculture future might be a long road ahead, but I hope that we won't be limited by our imagination. That's what this poem did for me. And there's always this unique element of our meetings where there's music or poetry or delicious Kernza food. This photo on the right was delicious Kernza bread for BLTs and an outstanding Kernza beer in the background. So this work to me is really inspiring and hopeful. And I can speak for myself, but maybe for others, that hope and inspiration are things that I really need more than ever right now. Okay, so now that I've gone on a little bit about beer and food, and we're nearing the end of a Friday afternoon, I wanted to kind of conclude my presentation by sharing some about students and teaching, which again is my primary appointment in the department. So I want to share some stories about student learning and why I feel it's really important that we tell some different stories and try to bring more people and more diverse perspectives into our classrooms. So let me start by telling you about some of the collaborations that I've had within my capstone course, which again is called Crop Management Strategies. And the general idea with this course is that it gives students an opportunity to do whole farm planning or integrated management, where they can take kind of all the things they've learned in their prior classes and prior experiences and synthesize that into a management plan. So what we do is visit farms, a farm or series of farms early in the semester, learn about their goals and challenges, and then work on a management plan over the course of the semester. So in 2019, I was awarded a SARE partnership grant with my friend and colleague, Angie Carter, a sociologist at Michigan Tech, who has done extensive work with women landowners in the Midwest. And so why did we focus on women landowners? You may know that women own or co-own about 42% of the land in Nebraska. And that percentage is fairly consistent across the Corn Belt and the Midwest. So women own a lot of land, but because farming is quite honestly often recognized as men's work, women are frequently excluded from conversations about what's happening on their land. And so often women and other non-operator landowners are often very willing to support their predominantly male tenants in advancing conservation and diversification on their land. And so in 2019, we had 3 women landowner tenant pairs as our case study farmers. And what happened when we intentionally presented the voices of women and landowners' perspectives that we don't always bring into maybe a class like this, the students really did gain a lot from it. So this is a quote from a student. This is in a publication that Angie and I published last year. A student here is describing how they were exposed to the importance of these landowner-tenant relationships and how necessary they are really for the longevity of the farm. And I think this is really important because so many of our students intend to farm in the future, and they'll wrestle soon with these relationships if they are not already. We also heard similar perspectives, sharing another student quote here, that this case study shifted the students' perspectives on non-operator landowners being concerned about more than just a rent check. We heard that a lot. That they recognize the care and the concern that these women landowners had for their land, and again, their ability to support change and support their tenants in conservation. And then Angie and I are working on another paper where we're trying to focus on the learnings of the landowners. And so this is a quote from one of the women landowners that I think is really, to me, at the land grant, an exceptional reminder of whose voices we uplift and the value that we can provide in just listening to different voices. And so this landowner felt very much that the ideas that she had presented to her tenant, she'd been talking about them, that they were not really heard in essence until we came as a university and listened and then suggested them as well. And so we can probably all relate to this in our own lives too, that sometimes it takes someone else to tell us the same thing to really hear it. And so again, I think a reminder for the support that we can provide when we listen to some different voices. I want to give you another example from my capstone course, which is that the last 2 years and in the upcoming year, we've had just this super partnership with Annette Sudbeck and Becky Ravenkamp with Lewis and Clark Natural Resource District in Northeast Nebraska. They have a Nebraska Environmental Trust grant that supports student travel, which I'm really proud that we're able to do. Becky is the coordinator of a watershed project where she's working with producers to utilize more conservation with a goal of improving water quality in the Bow Creek watershed. And yes, this is a picture of us getting ready to kayak the Missouri River. It's not a picture of us in a corner soybean field, but this was a real highlight for me. We love to kayak, but it also proved really powerful to the students, that we brought them along with these farmers who are talking about their connection to Bow Creek and growing up in that area and getting to recreate on the water. We also had Nebraska Game and Parks biologists out with us. We did a stream assessments. We did all of these things. And I want to show you some of the student quotes here about what they learned from the trip and the semester learning alongside this collaboration. And so the first quote that you see on the left, this realization from a student that agriculture impacts the environment, and this ought to be something maybe that we should be thinking about more of these connections with our crop management. And then the second quote on the right, I just love both of these quotes, but really this last one, a student is describing the value of seeing these farmers who had a conservation orientation. This last line, this was what the student said. I did not plant this, but I just love the fact that they reflected on that we are the deciding factor for how long the soil will serve us. And so along with some of my graduate students, we're going to work on trying to analyze some of the student learning to better understand what the students specifically gained from this experiential learning and collaboration with farmers and the Natural Resource District. I'm just really appreciative of this partnership. And I also want to share a little bit about another course that I teach, Agronomy 204, which is resource efficient crop management. It's a larger course, have a lot of students across the College of Agriculture, including in our department. And it is an introduction to many crop management concepts. So I wanted to share a little bit here because we're trying some different things with the class. This last year, I had the excellent teaching support of Sal Ramirez, and we really tried to interrogate this definition of efficiency with the students. So I thought I'd share this definition here. And so when we talk about efficiency, I think most people immediately go to productivity. That's what efficiency means, right? But the definition is definitely broader. It includes the idea that we don't want to have waste. We want to try to minimize waste. And in the context of the research I've shared for the students and their own future, minimizing waste, it's not just about inputs, right? It's also about natural resources and trying to utilize them the most efficient way that we can. I also do like that the definition includes something about being organized. That's probably a nice lesson for crop management as well as other aspects of our lives. And now we could probably have a nice conversation just ourselves in a seminar defining what the title of my class means, but I wanted to throw that out there. Because again, when we try to define what is efficient, we can, focus on thinking about that definition in different ways, and maybe tell some different stories. And so what we did with the course last year, we had a short video where we asked, and then asked students to look at an original extension publication from George Washington Carver. I imagine many of us are familiar with his amazing life and work. So he was a preeminent agricultural scientist at Tuskegee University that pioneered many of the fundamental agronomy concepts that we are familiar with today, including crop rotations. And so in the module, we asked students to explain how the bulletin, it's really short and digestible, describe how it pertains to resource use efficiency. And I really appreciated the students' response. So I underlined some key points. This first point, the idea that a diverse farm is a self-sufficient farm. I thought that was a really great reflection. And later here in the quote that the more that farmers can produce themselves, the more efficient they'll be. And that can be done through crop diversity, right? So I thought this was just a really nice summary of what the student learning was from hearing this different story. And when I look back actually at our evaluations from last year, the crop rotation module happened to be the highest ranked one for our whole, all the modules in the course. And that could have been Sal's excellent videos. He did the videos that week, could have been the experiential learning that we did. We went out and collected some data from Darren Redfern and Alyssa Kuhn's crop rotation site on East Campus, or it could include telling this different story, right? So it all tells me that there's a value in telling different stories, helping students to learn and grow. Related to diversity and belonging for our students, that comes alongside efforts that we took in the class to make education accessible. So I did want to share that Sal and I, and then he this year, we really hustled. We worked hard to provide an experience for students that was a hybrid. So we had a flipped classroom, we had videos online, we did the recitations by Zoom, then we recorded them. It had students in the classroom. He helped me hone a lot of our in-person activities and make them even better. And we had great student feedback about this. So 87% of students agreed that the course was well adapted for the pandemic, which was super for validating the hard work. And then interestingly, we did have a lot of students that chose to come in person. This was spring of 2021. But for those who engaged via Zoom or via the recordings later, half of them, nearly half the class said that when they did not join in person, it was not because of COVID. It was probably more for their preference, right? I know many of you know this too, how many students of ours have part-time jobs or family responsibilities, right? And so I think this goes to show the importance of making our content available to students so that they can engage and be their most complete selves. And then this is a really interesting finding too. There was really limited agreement of what students might want in the future, right? So when we ask about the preference for hybrid courses, 42% like it, a third don't like it, and a quarter are neutral, right? So that tells me that there is divergence in our student population, and the potential to meet their needs is not going to be uniform, right? And so I think that the collaborative team effort really helped us have more capacity to provide this broad experience for students that they told us did support their learning. So this last year, as you can see, was pretty busy. If I didn't respond to a request, you might get a sense of why this is where we've had to focus a lot of energy in student support. And then related to diversity and inclusion, I did want to share, as I near to the end of my presentation, a plug for another discussion series that I have been a part of, a team who's planning within the umbrella of the Inclusive Classrooms Community of Practice, along with Dean Heng Moss and her office's support. And so what we're planning this spring, we'll have information out early next week. And she mentioned this in the INR All Hands meeting last week. We'll have a 7-week discussion series on advancing inclusion. It's going to be Thursdays at lunchtime. It's going to build on the summer series about the urgency of inclusive classrooms from last year. And I did want to share again this INR pyramid, the idea that valuing diversity and accelerating inclusion are key to maximizing impact. And really, in my mind, that's important, of course, in science, but supporting human beings, as we have in our goal here, to be their most productive, creative, and happy selves is just really, in my mind, the right thing to do, and figuring out ways we can be kind and supportive to each other. And so I hope that this kind of professional development is beneficial to helping us all reach that goal. And then coming back to the beginning with this additional goal from the End 2025 strategic plan related to innovation and interdisciplinarity, I do think in our group, we're really trying to meet this goal, and I see collaboration really as a key to it. And then finally, I want to thank my team again. I really could not do my job without the support of these great humans and our dogs. And so if you thought you'd make it through a whole 40 minutes of my presentation without one photo of my dog, that's Quincy there on the right, you were wrong. There he is. So just wrapping up, I do believe that our work is demonstrating how diversification strategies have the potential to reduce inputs, increase profitability. I see this as adding to an already strong body of work, but showing real potential in Nebraska. I did want to reiterate too that resource use efficiency, this concept of efficiency, is broader than just productivity. It includes reducing waste and utilizing both inputs and natural resources. And the approaches that we're taking to do this really have to do with sunlight and soil. And then finally, the goals that we have, I recognize that they are challenging and multidimensional, but again, within INR, we recognize and appreciate that maximizing impact necessitates valuing diversity and accelerating inclusion. And I just want to end on a note that I do really appreciate working here at UNL in this department, alongside all of you who I know, understand, and value diversity in many of its forms. And I do think that sometimes we can be limited in taking the next steps, advancing some of our goals. And I guess I just encourage us not to be limited by our imaginations and to get to work with the change that we want to see. And so I thank you for joining this afternoon and look forward to continuing to work toward our goals together. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Andrea, for a great presentation. Let's give her a round of virtual applause. Okay.
I can hear it.
Yeah, so for the question and answer segment, if you have a question, you can either click raise hand icon, and I will allow you to ask, and also you can also type your question in the chat box. And I see there's already a couple questions in the chat box, so I will read these questions first. This first question is from Dr. David Holding. He asked, did the cover crops affect the emergence or dominance of Roundup resistant weeds?
Thanks, David, for that question. I assume you're probably referring to some of Elizabeth's projects. We did see, so in terms of emergence, the most commonly classified weed that she found in the seed bank was pigweed across all of those sites. I know that at some of the sites, the total weeds, like the data that I showed, were reduced, which would mean that has the potential to have reduced herbicide resistant weeds. That's probably the best answer that I can give for you right now, but we did see at some sites, at some of the intervals where she measured, the reduction of weed emergence, including some that are herbicide resistant. But pigweed, problematic, was the most commonly classified weed that she found in the seed bank.
Okay, there's one more question regarding the emergence of pigweed in that study. So Kobe asked, how long have the cover crops been in use at those locations you studied? He think that the amount of pigweed emergence may be greatly decreased after 8 years, which was the time pigweed seed remain viable. Yeah, so that's a question, like how long the cover crops is it?
So that's a great question. So for the on-farm sites, we measured after 4 years of cover crops. At the experiment stations, it was more like 7 years. So they had been in place for several years, but I mean, it depends, I guess, how you might categorize what's long-term. So not 8 years, so that's interesting. I'd be curious, maybe I'll bug you about some of that to know how long the viability in the seed bank, but that could be something that's happening. It's something interesting that, I mean, it's always fun, I think, when you find something you don't expect. So thanks for that question. And I just want to comment, I see David Meyer in the chat saying he believes it's possible to think about increasing yield and purposely building up the environment. So I appreciate that sentiment, you know, moving toward you know, thinking about not just sustainability, but, you know, regenerating or building up. So thank you for that comment.
So have audience, Jim have raised his hand, and will enable your mic.
Andrea, Jim Speck here.
Hey, Jim.
I just reviewed a paper for publication that comes out of Wisconsin where they've looked at cover crops and various crop rotations. And one thing that came out of this 3-year study was the so-called allelopathic effect on corn, early corn growth. It suppresses the growth of corn. I've seen this myself in several Nebraska fields. Have you seen any of that in your work where the yield is also hurt pretty badly in corn?
I mean, my experience is that the impact on corn is often related to like incomplete termination or issues with management, right? And that usually happens in the first few years of learning how to make your system work, whether that is like some issue with planter settings or like, again, incomplete termination. So I don't think it's uncommon. I'm not going to pretend like that doesn't happen. And I haven't seen it a lot in my own work. So I know that it is possible, but a lot of it I think is kind of the ramp up or learning curve that is associated with, you know, adding this complexity to management. So yeah, thanks for that question, Jim. I see another question to Lucci from Catherine in the chat.
Yeah. So Catherine asked, she said that you add a lot of experiential learning experience to your class. What key steps do you recommend for faculty members that want you to add more this type of experiential method to their classes?
Oh, that's a good question. My first instinct is to say, try and see what works. Yeah, planning trips and things that are more, and maybe starting some more simple, you know, the course I mentioned kind of came with the trip expectation, and that is complicated, right? Getting all of those steps coordinated, but worthwhile, right? So I think trying and maybe doing something small to get started and not being afraid to have it be imperfect the first time around. That's my immediate thought, but I probably have more things that I'll think of afterward if you ever want to chat more. I would say too, I appreciate in our department the collegiality and the opportunities that we have to discuss teaching ideas together. So talking to other people, and if you have some specific ideas and you know, getting their input about what has worked or what maybe hasn't worked as well.
Okay. So I also have a question for you, Andrea,
Sure.
that's regarding teaching. So I just started my position as a distant education lecturer. So one thing I do is I'm trying to help faculty member to make their course available online. And you did a great job with your 204, and you delivered as a hybrid course. What's your thought on doing the same for like capstone classes? Because, for example, in the turf grass program I'm familiar with, the capstone class also involve a lot of like field trip. We visit golf courses and we conduct a project and field studies in the golf course, which present a challenge when we're trying to convert this type of a class to deliver them online. So what's your experience and what's your recommendation if we want to say make a capstone class available as a distant course?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm probably not the most experienced in online teaching to say. What I can say is that, in the fall of 2020, the capstone course, we unfortunately were not able to take an extended trip in the way that we were able to in 2021 up to visit the farmers in Northeast Nebraska. But we did get most of the class to go up for a day, which was better than not going at all. And I think that there's almost, in my mind, at least from my experience, like no substitute for some of that visit and seeing and doing in person. I think one strategy I know that colleagues in the department have discussed is having students maybe do things asynchronously, or going to have some kind of outdoor experience that they can do on their own time asynchronously is an approach that create their own field trip, or go observe something like closer to where you are, or that is accessible to you, versus like mandating that it be something that they all do at the same time together, or to the same place, right? So that's one approach. I do think again, between 2020 and 2021 in the class, it made a difference to be able to spend more time and have more time in person. But we were able to, there's some nice photos in 2020. We did some things outside. I recorded everything, voice recording, and, tried to be really, I think there's just, my experience in trying to do things in a hybrid mode over the last 2 years is like, there's just, I'm sure as you know too, like the basics of teaching and the fundamentals of, having your course organized and making things easily accessible to students. I think that does go a long way. And the hybrid environment, I think, just kind of necessitates that even more. So I'd be happy to brainstorm more with you, but those are some of my immediate thoughts. It is a challenge in that, and especially kind of getting students to work together in groups without, always being together in person. That it is a challenge, but not insurmountable.
Thank you.
I was going to add, unless other people have questions, to Jim's allelopathy question, as I think of it, I don't know that I've seen allelopathic effects in following cover crops, but I think a lot of people, and I don't know the paper you just reviewed, it could be that's what it was. I think that's kind of like hard to measure in the field. And I think that sometimes people will claim that's the issue when it's really, I don't know, potentially a water or nitrogen or some kind of other reason for, emergent suppression, something like this. I don't always know that that's like something that I think people find it easy to say. And again, it could have been the case in that instance, but I think sometimes those yield effects could be related to other things. But I do think that with management and figuring out the system and timing, and again, planter settings, all these things, that most experienced farmers and researchers, we don't see those negative impacts in time. So allelopathy gets blamed for a lot of issues that may or may not be related to the cover crop. Yes, she's a good person to talk with about it.
Okay, so Dr. Steve Benziger have a question asking, are there metrics as to what should go into a cover crop? He said he presumed legume are aided for nitrogen, rye for its early growth and winter survival. What is the system for selecting a cover crop?
What is the system for selecting a cover crop? So I suspect you're referring more to like variety selection versus like goals, but I'll try to like refer to both. That's what I'm thinking about with your question, Steve, that, we like when we talk to our students about cover crops in our cover crop management course, the first and most important thing is really, what are your goals of having the cover crop, right? Because I showed you this example of where we were trying to optimize the system for nitrogen, right? And that required more time for especially the legume to grow and have good fall establishment so that it could even survive the winter. Thankfully, our vetch did 2020 into 2021. So I think, designing what's the system, it depends on what your goals are, right? So if your goal is just to get some ground cover and maybe just in the fall and not have to deal with termination in the spring, then something that won't overwinter is a good choice. I think the reality is that and you would have good probably perspective on this too, Steve, that since there's a little bit more activity around breeding for cover crops, that we haven't really kind of optimized variety selection for in nearly the way that we have for cash crops, right? And so I think in terms of the variability of characteristics like cereal rye, early season vigor, surviving the winter, starting to grow quickly in the spring, all those things, like, the ratings that various varieties might have relative to each other, we just don't know. In fact, I use the example sometimes that like lots of people will buy seeds that are variety not stated, right? Which you would never do that for a cash crop, but for cover crop is something you're not, trying to spend as much money on. It doesn't really give you the opportunity to select variety. So hopefully that answers your question in terms of whether it's like the goal or the system. The goal or the system or the variety. Okay, so David Holding has a question about the Kernza grain. How is it for gluten sensitivity? It does have gluten, dough elasticity of Kernza grain. So I can tell you that we have, I actually made delicious sweet potato Kernza pancakes this week. We've made Kernza sourdough bread, and I've had bread, muffins, typically, and I don't know if this is answering your question because I'm not probably versed enough in some of its food quality properties, but my understanding is that bakers, that's kind of what we've done here when we've made bread, are like cutting their mix with some percent, not necessarily 100%, in various recipes. So again, my pancakes were 100% Kernza flour, but again, I don't know if that's answering your question, but I think as a partial substitute for baking, I can speak to its deliciousness. So
Yeah.
Kernza bread, typically, Steve, I bet you there is 100% Kernza bread. A lot of what I've had has been blended with wheat. That's my answer to Steve's question. I see Tom's question. I see a higher adoption of cover crops and more environmentally friendly practices on moderate sized farm operations. Do you see paths to increase adoption across larger scale farms? That's a great question, Tom. And actually there is some research that suggests that larger farms are more likely to have cover crops. That's not like every survey in every place, but that kind of does make sense to me in terms of having the resources to be able to make that investment. There's of course a real time trade-off associated with planting and termination, but I do see a path for larger farms, and I think there's some evidence to suggest that.
Okay, so if there's no more question, we will wrap it up. And thanks again, Andrea, and thanks for your great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you all.